It was a damp October night on I-81, just past midnight, and the air on the shoulder smelled of cold diesel, wet tar, and the faint, sweet rot of river leaves. I had been driving all evening, the cab warm, the radio low, and the glow of my dash a small island of orange in the dark. My name is James. I run long hauls out of Syracuse. I was 32 at the time, and tired in the way only a trucker knows, the kind of tired that folds into the bones and talks back. And I can still tell you exactly where I was when the first of three things happened that nothing in my logbook could explain. I was alone in my sleeper, routine and boredom clapping like mittens around my wrists, when Mike, my regular dispatcher, called on the company line to push me through an extra drop and joked about the closed diner on exit 47. "You ever stop at that place, Jimmy?" he said, voice flat with middle-of-the-night irony. "Only in daylight," I replied, rubbing my temple. "They got good coffee, or at least they used to." The static had a taste that night, like metal in the back of my throat. And outside, the wind along the overpass made a thin rubbing sound against the cab, like cloth dragged across nails. I slipped on my jacket because the windows were fogging and I wanted the air. For a moment, it felt like a regular stop, ordinary and habitual, until the road light caught something that looked like a man standing at the first exit ramp. I will tell you what I saw at exit 47 and why I could not sleep for 3 days after. I will tell you what the state trooper wrote in his report, what my co-driver Hank believed, and what Carla the waitress whispered later under the diner counter. But first, in the dark and the drizzle, something touched the corner of my trailer, and the hair on my forearm lifted like an alarm. That small touch set everything else in motion and changed how I saw that stretch of highway forever. I had been driving since I was 25 and liked to think nothing surprised me anymore, but that night taught me that familiarity is thin glass. As a kid, I grew up on a farm outside Oneida, hauling my dad's old junk to the scrapyard on Saturdays, learning to read the weather by the smell of the soil. I ran semis because it paid and because the road was honest work, where you could put your thoughts in a row and move them along. At 26, I lost my brother in a car crash, a slow blur on a rainy ramp. And that grief taught me to watch edges, to pay attention to people standing by overpasses, to notice when something about a person did not line up with the place they were in. I learned to trust the burn in my gut that said, get out, check, leave. After the funeral, I married the road to the idea of safety, and for 5 years I kept myself in the seat like a promise. By the time I met Hank, a short man with a laugh that came out like a cough, I was steady enough to take another one on board. Together we ran the mid-Atlantic loops. Hank slept light. He called his sister Bonnie on long nights and hummed country stations when he thought I was asleep. Tom the mechanic and Earl the yardmaster knew me by my rig and by the way I checked my fifth wheel. Jenna at the Syracuse terminal knew my coffee order. Luis in dispatch could rattle off ETA to the minute. Those names and faces are the anchors in this story, because when things started to go wrong, they were the ones who kept turning up, each with a reaction that mapped to their lives. The first scene started simple. I eased into the exit 47 ramp, the truck's tires whispering on wet concrete. The man was under the overpass, a dark silhouette against the sodium light. Not waving, just standing, hands in pockets, too still. I killed the engine, and the night crowd of insects fell away. The cab felt suddenly like a coin box. "You see that?" Hank asked, peering past the curtain of my sleeper window, voice tight. "Yeah," I said, but I kept the window cracked, air smelling of rain and old coffee. "Do you want me to get out?" he asked. "No," I said, which was a lie, and then I fumbled for my flashlight. The light was a thin blade, and when it crossed the figure, he moved his head, and I saw a face, pale in the sodium, too cleanly blank, as if sanded smooth, eyes too dark, like two spent holes. "Hey," I called, making my voice small so it would not shatter the quiet. The man did not answer. He only turned, the coat collar up, and walked toward the shoulder, slow, like a man who had rehearsed his steps. "You good?" I said. He stopped and looked at me as if he were trying to recall who I was. The first exchange, "You lost?" I asked. He said nothing. "You need a ride?" Hank said, voice higher. The man inhaled, and for a second I could hear his breath, a dry scrape. "I live here," he said, and his voice was flat, no accent, a voice that fit nowhere. "On an overpass?" I said, not a question, a poor joke that landed wrong. "Exit 47, he replied, and his mouth did not move much. "Name," I said. "Call me 47, he said, like that was a name and a thing to brag about. We argued about calling the state trooper, Hank saying yes, me saying no, but dialing anyway, because muscle. Memory had me pick up the phone. The dialogue lengthened into the late-night ritual of questions and answers, 8 or 9 exchanges, each time the man replying with odd specificity about the exit and nothing about himself. He carried a sack, old canvas, with something that clinked and sounded like metal. When I asked what was in the sack, he smiled a small smile that did not reach his eyes, and said, "Stuff that fell off trucks," which was the first time I felt something like threat move across the asphalt. Sensory details saturated that stretch of scene. The tire's small squeak as my hand moved the gear, the smell of wet wool from the man's coat, the copper tang in the air like old pennies, the distant hum of a semi braking on the highway, the sticky grit of road salt under my shoes when I stepped out. The man had a way of rocking on his feet that made my stomach tighten. The first moment of tension arrived in a long, slow paragraph that felt like a held breath. I remember noticing the sound of a second vehicle approaching, low and steady, headlights sweeping. The man said, "They come for the ones who watch," and my mouth went dry. I called dispatch again. "James, what's up?" Mike asked, and I could hear the canned coffee machine in the background. "Somebody under exit 47, I said. "Call the trooper," Mike said. The radio crackled to life, and a voice said we had a unit on the way. The man watched us with a look I will never forget, like someone reading the last page of a book and waiting for you to catch up. The tension paragraph here was dense and slow, a rope pulled taut, and I remember hearing Hank's breath change, the small click of his lighter. We had 8 exchanges in under 10 minutes that night, questions looping back on themselves, a rhythm like an interrogation and like a lullaby rolled into one. The state trooper arrived with headlights slicing across gravel. Officer Reyes stepped out, uniform wet at the cuffs, badge catching the orange light. He asked us to stand back and called to the man. "Sir, can you come here for a second?" he said, voice even. The man obeyed like a puppet, hanging back and letting the officer close the distance. In the officer's notebook later, he wrote a short line about the man being disoriented and checking for warrants. The technical side of that interaction was simple and matter-of-fact. Troopers use standard approach protocol for pedestrian encounters on highways, keeping vehicles between the subject and traffic, radioing in descriptions, and requesting backup when the subject will not provide ID. That is what Officer Reyes did. But that night, protocol felt inadequate against the small wrongness of the man. At some point, the sack opened, a clatter, and 3 things spilled out across the gravel. A child's toy truck, a strip of fabric like a ribbon, and a small metal key. I remembered the toy, a battered red cab, its paint nicked, and a small spot of something that might have been rust or dried blood. The man looked at the toys like they were old friends, and then like he was surprised they were there at all. We all tried to piece it together. "Where did you get these?" Officer Reyes asked. "Fell off," the man said. Hank leaned in, voice low. "From where?" And the man repeated, "Off trucks." And then in a voice like paper tearing, "I collect what falls." The trooper tried to be clinical, but his hand shook on his pen. The scene broke into a cascade when a second truck pulled off and its driver, Luis, a big man with a shaved head, ran over shouting that something had brushed his trailer. He said the brush knocked his mirror loose. He said he had not seen anyone. He said his dash camera showed a flicker of movement on the shoulder. We watched footage later, and it was a glitchy smear, a shadow passing like smoke. That moment was my second heavy-tension paragraph. For nearly 600 characters, I can still feel the pull, the adrenaline, the metallic note of the key in my palm, the way the man's eyes slid to the overpass and stayed there like he was listening for a voice only he could hear. We had a long back and forth as the officers questioned us. Hank, Luis, Officer Reyes, me, the man calling himself 47, and each spoke in turns. A sequence of 9 short exchanges, logistics and small human reactions threading together. "You okay?" Officer Reyes asked me. "I think so," I said. "You sure?" he pressed. "No," I admitted. "Good," he said, and that was the end of his reassurance. We left with a report filed. The man escorted to the cruiser after a brief struggle when he refused to get in, and then complied as if the compliance had been part of a rehearsal. The diner at exit 47 was closed, but for a few years they kept keys under the counter. The next morning at the Syracuse terminal, the gossip ran like diesel, and Jenna served coffee in thick styrofoam and said she had never seen a face like that. That first story ends not with explosion, but with the slow aftertaste of unease, a pause that held until the second thing happened 3 nights later on a different run. The second incident was at a rest stop near the river, where Carla, a waitress at the truck stop I'd known for years, waved me over to take shelter from a rain squall. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said, and then laughed because that was softer than saying you needed help. I parked under a sagging canopy, the lights overhead dripping water like glass beads, the smell of fright, grease promising comfort, and I told her about exit 47. She listened, hands in a towel, and then told me something about a man who used to stand at that exit 10 years back, who collected things from the road, who once came into her diner and sat in silence until closing. "He left a note," she said, eyes gone small. It said, "Stay with the exits and know which trucks are honest." The words clung in the air like steam. In that second scene, we had a long exchange with Carla about neighborhood rumors, about a local named Tom who once lost a toolbox to the roadside and swore he saw it later in a burlap sack. "People talk," she said. "They always have," she added. We argued gently about coincidence and fate, the dialogue stretching to 10 quick turns as she poured coffee and I tried to make a joke about haunted dice. Outside, a truck idled, music muffled, and beneath the stop, the bite of grease and sugar on my tongue should have been comfort. Instead, when I stepped away to use the restroom, I found a paper bag on the bench with a single old wrench inside, a filet de blood on the handle like an accent. My mouth filled with a salt I could not wash off. That second cliff reached another dense tension paragraph where my memory holds the sound of a spoon dropping into a ceramic mug, the echo of laughter distant and wrong, my palms sweating against my jacket, and the wrench ridiculous and intimate at once. Hank called me and asked me to come home early, and I told him I could not explain why. We had a third exchange where a trucker named Earl, old and ornery, muttered about nosing around where you do not belong, and left. The third incident was the sharpest. 2 weeks later, on a midnight leg toward Pennsylvania, my dashcam picked up something at exit 47, and the feed showed a figure standing under the overpass that looked like the first man, then a second figure beside him, and then the two appearing in a reflection in my mirror like ghosts stepping through. I was alone by then, my co-driver on the other side of the country, and I pulled over because denial requires space to run. I texted Hank and the exchange ran rapid. "You awake?" he wrote. "At exit 47, I typed back. "Stay," he wrote. "Do not get out," he wrote again. He told me to call the troopers, to stay in the cab, and to keep the doors locked. I had 8 messages from him in 5 minutes, each one a small command that became prayer. The man or men stood very still on the shoulder, and I watched their silhouette like someone watching a slow film. Then one stepped forward and placed something on the guardrail, a small sack, and retreated without looking at the road. Later, hands trembling, I approached and found inside a folded handwritten note, words scrawled in a looping hand. Remember who carried you. Remember the trucks that slowed. The language made my teeth ache. That is the scene where everything snapped, a shove of instinct and fear and a violent need to be rational. I called Officer Reyes again. We met under the overpass with flashlights and a second trooper, and we dug shallow into the gravel with a spoon to look for any sign of burial. We found nothing but a series of cigarette butts, a scrap of blue cloth, and an old license plate with letters worn smooth. The confrontation turned into flight as a car passed too fast and the lights washed out the men. They became faceless and then gone. The third tension paragraph is long and granular. The cold in my veins, the chalky taste in my mouth, the way the key felt like a coin that did not belong to any currency I knew. The police did their duties. They canvassed the bridge for prints, checked cameras, and filed an unusual report about a pedestrian giving evasive answers and leaving objects on the right-of-way. Forensics told us later in excessively blunt terms that prints on porous surfaces can be inconsistent and that environmental contamination often prevents a conclusive match without a reference sample, which they lacked. That technical note sits in the files and sounds official, but does not explain the emptiness I felt. In the weeks after the 3 incidents, neighbors at truck stops compared notes. Luis told me he had a cousin who once found a sack of odd bits behind a warehouse and swore the items were placed there like offerings. Jenna brought up a clipped news piece about a man detained years earlier near Exit 47 for vagrancy and then released because there was no crime. Tom the mechanic and Earl the yard man had their own half-jokes that were really worry. We sat in a circle like survivors and spoke in short bursts, the dialogue thick with possibility and with disbelief, at least 8 exchanges each time as we dissected memory. The immediate consequences were small and large at once. I slept poorly for nights, my chest a tight drum. I changed my route for a short run, refused to stop at the diner alone, and called my brother Mark to tell him to watch his kids when he drove out that way. The state trooper's report came back thin and procedural. The man was described as transient and released with a notice to appear that never resulted in a court date. We all kept the objects we had found in evidence envelopes at the request of Officer Reyes. Months later, when I asked him if they had ever run latent prints, he said they had, but no matches came up in the system. The uncertainty was a kind of wound. A month after the last event, I took a run back by Exit 47 during daylight. The overpass looked ordinary, the same rust stains and graffiti, the same blind curve. But the place had an economy of silence. People noticed me looking. A young woman named Carla waved from her yard and said the town had always had its odd ones, and some people tracked them like weather. At the 1-month mark, I had not yet healed. I wrote the company a short memo chronicling my unease, and I took leave for a week to sleep in my own bed with Hank and to see a counselor at the clinic. The community talked, but no one could say we had been in real danger, and that ambiguity made the memory itch. At 3 months, the state trooper called me back to say a distant town reported a man matching the description, but he was gone by the time they arrived. I met with Officer Reyes for coffee at a diner, and we went over the footage again, pixel by pixel, and he admitted he was as unsettled as I was. He described procedural constraints, the limits of evidence without DNA or prints, and how weather and surface material eroded trace elements. He filed a follow-up, and the paper showed a small note of caution to local drivers. The town reaction was quieter then, a slow mending of normal. At 6 months, I went back to be honest with myself about whether I had turned something minor into a long fear. I still avoid Exit 47 at night when I can. Hank has changed shifts. Tom tightened security on yard checks. Jenna says she locks the diner at 11 now if it is slow. I still have the metal key and the red toy truck in a box under my bunk. Sometimes I take them out, feel the dent in the toy where someone else found it, and I imagine a man who walks the night collecting small remembrances from the road. The long epilogue shows that the thing did not resolve with neat closure. After 1 month, I was jittery, sleeping in the day and driving at night only with company, finding myself watching every overpass like a father watches his child. People I worked with grew cautious, and some refused to take exit 47 routes. There were whispers about prayer and about calling in a pastor to bless the route, and for a while drivers would leave small offerings at rest stops like talismans. At 3 months, the police had a partial lead that dissolved. A man in a neighboring county fit the description, but he had been hospitalized and his records were sealed. Conversations between dispatch and highway patrol referenced mental health concerns and vagrancy detention protocols, and there was a polite but unsatisfying end to the search. Community memory softened the edges, but did not smooth them away. At 6 months, I found some peace in routines again, but never full ease. Started taking pictures of overpasses as a private ritual, cataloging them in my phone, noting light angles and shoulders, small acts to regain a sense of control. I signed up for a local drivers group and we instituted a check-in system for late runs. People adapted their habits and life moved on, but the image of a pale face in sodium light returns like a turned page from time to time. If you were in my seat, what would you do? Stop and help, or call and wait, or keep driving and hope nobody gets hurt? Write in the comments starting with "I would stop" or "I would keep driving" so I can see how people reckon with that choice. Your answers help me and others understand how we might act if we ever find a man at an exit with a sack of things. If you want more of these verified late-night encounters, subscribe, and I will dig through logs, call the troopers who were there, and bring you the follow-ups. There is no neat moral here, only a series of small choices and a reminder that roads hold stories. Even now, when I pass exit 47, I slow, just a touch, and look for the shape of a coat against the sodium light, because that is what weeks of work and a strange nights taught me. If you liked this account, subscribe for more local reports and updates, and if you have your own late-night trucker encounter, share it below. I wish I could say the man was a mystery solved, but like many small-town things, it kept its edges. I keep the toy and the key because objects remember in ways people often do not. And sometimes I take them out and run my thumb over the metal and wonder what else falls off the backs of trucks at night and what sometimes gets picked up and carried away.